So I got some 1-inch 065 wall tubing there. So it's a little bit thinner wall, still very strong once it's all welded together. But it'll be lighter, so I don't have to worry too much about adding all this tubing on this mower. I also just asked them if they had any free cutoffs, and they gave me a decent amount. Your metal supermarket always asks for their free stuff. They always got something kicking around. Anyways, all the tubing I could possibly ask for, the Rogue Fab bender's gonna be getting used. Alright, so now that I got the suspension actually working here, how I like it, lots of flex, we still got nice up-down movement here. See, full droop there. We can bring this up. Check that out. So from fully maxed down here all the way up there is about 14 and a half inches of travel, which is extreme amount of travel. How am I going to make shocks for that? Yeah. So I kind of started, and I'll show you kind of what I've got going on and then what I'm going to start doing, because as you guys can see, the engine's sitting right over there. It's actually time to start putting that in. But I picked up some of these kind of gas nitrogen filled shocks, or I think they're just gas. Yeah, high pressure shocks, whatever. They say right on here they're 56 foot-pounds of torque to push this sucker in. This shock roughly has 11 and a half inches of travel, which is plenty. I think 11 and a half inches on the mower is perfect. So the other thing I have here is a pit bike front fork tube. So this still works. It's got a big spring in it, the tube and everything. So I'll show you kind of what I've got going on here. So I've put in the full shock, this shock, this black shock inside of the fork tube, which has an internal spring in it. So I'll have a little bit of pre-give. As you guys can see here, if I push on it, that little bit of give right there is not the actual shock moving. That's the spring I have up here. So that's the preload, and then 56 inches, or 56 foot-pounds. You can see I can collapse that all the way into the knuckle there. So that should be plenty amount of shock. The only issue is the end here, as you can see, it can move around. So what I'm thinking is actually laying out some internal bushings to go inside of here to hold the shock tube in the center of the fork tube. And then I'm going to lay up a little spacer to actually go right into the end here so that this sleeve goes in at a perfect spot. It'll all make more sense once I start getting some more parts made. Definitely a lot of shit going on. But before, as you guys can see, this is a huge shock. So how am I actually going to mount this onto a mower? And as you guys can see, this thing's sticking way the frick up there. And I'm fine with that. I think I can handle that. I think we can make these sticking out the hood or close to. But the thing is to actually build some shock towers out of some tube that I just picked up there. But I have no idea where I want to put them. I need to actually drop the engine in to figure out where the spacing I have is, because I'm probably going to have to come over that. I don't know. We're going to have to figure this out right now. So let's get the engine tossed in here and let's see what we're working with. There's a lot of talking. Right, check it out. Couple tubes bent up. One of the shocks is somewhat mounted onto the axle. We went with a bolt through the axle because that's the easiest and simplest way, and I like that. And then we've also got this main tube coming across that's going to get welded in on both sides. And then these bent tubes are going to come up. I extended the frame just a little bit with these little sleeves that I slid in there. Laid them down and slid them in there, pressed them in, welded them around. So that's going to get put up on those, bent around, over, and then welded on to those guys. And then I'll add some bracing in. And then the shock tubes will be on the inside of that and get mounted. Let's get her done. Next thing to do, let's get these tubes on because it's going to look absolutely insane with those tubes on there. Guys, making some great progress on the mower. Check it out. Alright, I just wanted to go over here. All this tube bend I'm doing is with my M600 Rogue Fab tube bend. This is just their standard one. They have a heavy duty one and a couple other ones. They have a bunch of multiple attachments you can add onto these things, and they're freaking awesome. I love this thing. Let's get into some of the tube that I'm working on right now because this is coming together awesome. Alright, so essentially you just mount your tube into your clamping block here. It's just two 14 mils in an aluminum block. And then you set the tube into your other die back here, you click your air over hydraulic button there, and boom, she fires up. As you can see on the scale here, 180 degrees. You can bend this thing all the way around. This thing is awesome. Right now, on that tube that I just showed you is going to go across the front here. I'm putting two 45-degree angle bends so that'll come out a little bit so that I cleared the carburetor. As you guys can see, this thing is stuffed in here. So, like I did, tack welded on both sides there with that tube across. I don't know how I'm going to do other tubing. I just know that I want to get this one over there. But holy crap, this thing is coming together. All this is going to be under the hood too, I believe. I still got to test fit the hood and all that kind of shit. Other than, as you can see, this is a giant ass shock, and that's at full flex. So, shocks coming up out of the hood. What do you guys think? Leave a comment, let me know if, well, that's what is happening. So just let me know what you guys think of that setup. I think I'm going to like it. It's going to be full crawler status, even though this isn't the rock crawler of all the mowers. But we'll see how it does in the rocks. It should do phenomenal. Alright, so I made up one of these little brackets that I was talking about, and now my issue is trying to figure out where I need to mount this. I'm thinking it needs this tiny bit of a front rake to it. I'm liking kind of right about there, so I kind of got to build a shock tower up to that. Other than that though, the shocks worked out great. So Tony's got it all set up for me here. So we made the internal spacer set. The internal gas shock can't move around at all. There's 4 spacers in there. I mean, it works perfect. And then if I flip this over for you, so this internal, I needed to lay down a piece to fit into there, and I've done one of those so far. If we get up under here, you can see just a tiny little tack there on a spacer, and it works perfect. So the only other thing we added in here was the preload shock. So not only does the gas shock go up and down, but at the very top there to fill the space, we put a shock in, and it's a spring. So when this thing's bouncing on, just riding down the trail, the dampener shock isn't actually the thing going blah, 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 blah. It will actually be the spring at the very top of it. So that's just going to preserve the life of our gas shocks, even though these are only 20 bucks for the little shock, and I can just replace it very easy. But the other thing, you guys are probably noticing this big steering rack. This is going to be how I'm steering the mower. This I had for a dune buggy project a while ago. I forgot I even had it. But it is just a normal like golf cart steering rack or go-kart steering rack. I'm going to chop it all up and make it tiny, and it's going to sit on the very front of the axle. It's actually going to be, you see how this thing steers off this little nipple right here? I'm going to actually try and get that to go right through this center hole, the old articulation hole. It would be quite the show if I can actually get that to do that. I got these 2 bolt hole mounts here, so I can mount 2 little ring clamps around the outside of that unit, and then run my direct steering under this, back through there, and then up to the steering wheel. Yes, 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 yes. This is so much work. Ridiculous amount of work, but damn is this ever looking freaking awesome. Today, I'm going to take today to look at steering. So steering needs to be completely redone. So that means everything connected from the steering wheel down, I need to just get rid of and make room for the new direct steering down to the go-kart steering rack, which I'll show you guys in a second. I kind of went over it before, but I'll go into more detail, and I got to fully take it apart so I can actually put it in there to show you guys exactly what I mean. Today, that's what I'm working on. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to start working on the rear transaxle, because I want to start working on a bunch of things so that I can just start fixing up the small things, or just finishing off the small things here and there. But getting it on all 4s would be very nice so I can set the ride height how I want it. Anyways, let's get right back into this thing. It's freaking cold out. I'm freezing in here today, but it's alright. I got my new boots, thanks to my family, so I can weld without welding my toes. But anyways, let's get right into this. I'm excited to get this steering done. I'm excited to do this kind of steering. We haven't done a steering rack before out of a golf cart, go-kart situation. So let's get into that and see how it does. Let's do this. Oh, and also, we gotta think of a name for this thing. Tony said, hey, we gotta stop calling this thing the Ford LT, because that's just like brand. That's just the model of the mower. And I'm like, that's 100% right, Tony. All of our other mowers have names: Scrappy, Big Gray, Magnum, Ralph, Musky mowers that you guys haven't seen that we've named. But this one has no name yet. So we gotta think of a name. I don't know what I wanna go around. I don't know what I wanna call it. So leave it in a comment. Tell me guys what you think. We're usually gonna pick the names, but if you guys come up with something cool, we'll definitely look into it. Anyways, let's get into this build. I'm loving it. So, like I was saying before, I have this old clapped out steering. Now, it's not that clapped out, it just looks very clapped. But the thing I like about this is it has nice little joints at the end and these very nice little swivel joints that are very stiff. So, I'm gonna shorten this whole thing so that this all fits right onto this front axle of the mower. Now, first thing I'm gonna do, take everything off this and get it down to just kind of like the bare little size that I need. So let's get it torn apart and see what we can do. Alright, this setup came with some beautiful parts. I'm a really big fan of these huge, like, joints here. They're super stiff. Nice big threading on them. These whole ends are threaded. Now, I'm going to take this apart fully to figure out exactly how I'm going to do it, but this was not a centered shaft, but I was able to move it somewhat into the center, and I still believe I can still turn this. So that might work out really good in my favor, because originally it was one shaft really long. It had this whole piece on the one shaft as a spacer. But anyways, I got to get into actually tearing apart the mower to see where this is going to fit and how I'm going to mount it to the front axle. But first, I'll put this in the vise, put the drill on here, and spin it over, see how she works. Alright, so this is what we're looking about for travel. About 4.5 inches. On the actual mower side of things, I need to get rid of that steering gear in there, and there's one behind it. You guys can't really see it, but it's back there. Kind of see it there. And then that comes underneath. You can see that bottom shaft up there, and then that other big gear that you couldn't really see gets connected to this, and then this is the steering shaft that went onto the front. All that needs to come out. I need to move this bucket. I need to put this thing on some tires and drill some holes in there and get some stuff figured out. In the meantime, stay put, and I'll get that stuff done for you guys. Alright, so as you guys can see, no more steering left. We've got everything taken out. There's two little bearing type units that held the steering in with the gear. I ended up having to cut the steering shaft just to make it easier and less work for me. So a couple little bushing units here. I'm going to keep this metal one because it's actually pretty good, but this is just a plastic one. It's crap. A couple washers I'll keep and whatnot, and the plastic unit here. I don't think I'm going to be running this steering wheel, so we'll see which one I end up picking, and I'll keep the gear for something else. But everything's looking pretty damn awesome. I am just going to leave this gear in here because it's way too much work to take out, so I'm just going to weld it into place. Other than that though, it's looking pretty awesome. Alright, so check it out. We got the steering wheel all put in there. We ended up using that one bushing here, so as you can see, works good. Nice little adapter to bolt the steering wheel on. Works great. Alright, so now with that all good to go, and this all cleared up, we can actually move on to the front axle. So let's go over a few things here. Alright, so to get this giant unit to actually sit here and not have to go under the axle to actually steer the unit, I wanted to reuse the actual pivoting hole. But the only thing is, this has a spline shaft, as you can see, and one of these guys on top of there will not go in there, nor can I put it through the back. So I hopped on the lathe and I lathed out a fitting. I turned down the outside here and the inside of this guy is just very lip. So now with that, I can actually put that onto there, and then I'm going to weld the inside so that this shaft is actually going to be connected to this guy. And then I'll probably put a locking pin through the back side or through the side as well, just so that this all steers together. And the beauty about this is this just slides right in there, and then this will go right in like that. Now, the thing I'm trying to figure out is, do I want to have it sitting up where the actual steering clears the whole axle, but these are very high off to the sides, as you can see, off to the sides here, to the actual steering spindles. This sits pretty high, so the angle on that might not be the greatest. So if I turn this around, I got the perfect height basically that I want, but I am sitting lower. Now as you can see, it's a decent amount lower. Right now I'm actually above the front axle, and here I'm like an inch below. So I'm sacrificing a low spot here, but gaining better clearance angle there, or steering angle I mean, or I got my clearance underneath, but bad steering angle. So either way I gotta figure it out, but the idea is with this welded on this side, I can attach a rod in the inside that'll go onto this spline side, and then I can have this set up so that this will sit on here, this will be on the back side, and then I'll actually be steering out the back here underneath everything up to the mower. Yes, I understand that's a lot of work, but I think this has never been done before. Yes, people have used this setup, but I don't think anyone's done the 3-link wishbone with the go-kart steering rack. I think it's just a great setup. Anyways, let's get on to the next thing. I don't really even know what that is. I guess I really got to decide if I want it to go this way or this way. Alright, so there's the steering idea, guys. Yes, it is a lot, but that's what the page is all about. All we ever do is a bunch of custom stuff. So, I figured I'd go over that for you guys though, because it's definitely a lot. Steering's always the hardest thing to accomplish, especially if you want a smooth actuation of the steering. But I think that we're gonna get that right now on this setup. It's gonna take a lot to get this going, but let's get it going. Alright, so I need to mount this to the front axle. And I figured I'd do that with a couple of these little guys and some bolts on the actual front axle. Now I'm thinking, as an extra little precautionary, I'll make one more mount. I got this old pipe thread fitting. I'm just lading the inside, so turning down the internal diameter, and then I'll turn off all these threads and clean it up, make it a real nice little fitting. I'll show you guys where that's gonna go in a minute. But for now, yeah, you can see I just started turning the inside, and yeah, I gotta get rid of this ugliness. Alright, so after all that lathing, we are left with this beautiful little coupling. So it's press fit on there. I actually had to hammer that and press that right on there, but that's beautiful, exactly how I want it. My other metal piece will slide right up and button right up to the face of this guy. And then I didn't have any perfect tubing, and you guys saw I was going to use those big clamps, but they're pretty ugly. But I did a little bit of metal smithing, so I hopped on the lathe, laid down these little 1-inch, inch and a half tubing, but this was only like 1.25 inch ID. So I ended up cutting a slit, and then I had a hammer that was perfectly 1.5 inches, and I slid it over that, pounded it circle until it fit, and then now these are nice snug fit on there. And then so I can use this, come off of here with a tubing or a steel plate down to this guy, and then off of these two mounts, mount it to the axle. So lots of work, but I just figured I'd go more low profile mounts here so it looks better and less weight up on the front. So let's get to actually getting this thing on the axle. So far, coming together awesome.